In the fall of 1988, a young girl named Melissa Tremblay went for a walk near her home in Lawrence, Massachusetts. She vanished without a trace under mysterious circumstances. Despite a widespread search and the efforts of law enforcement, no one knew what had happened to her until many months later, when a shocking discovery would bring more questions than answers. Melissa had been adopted as a baby by Janet and Robert Tremblay. Growing up, she was full of energy, loved fashion, singing and reading, and was popular with her friends. After her parents divorced, her mother Janet frequently took Melissa along to a local bar, as she had no one else to care for her. On September 11th, when Melissa was 11 years old, Janet and Melissa went to the bar, but something went terribly wrong that day. At some point, Melissa got bored and left to walk around the neighborhood as she often did. She spent hours playing with other children, but by the late afternoon she was nowhere to be found. At first, Janet thought she was just wandering off, as she sometimes did, but as hours passed and Melissa didn't return, worry set in. Janet and her companion searched the area for hours, but no sign of the girl. It was getting dark by 9 p.m., and Janet finally called the police. The search continued through the night, but there were no clues. Some people speculated that Melissa may have run away, but her mother insisted this was impossible. Melissa had always been afraid of the dark and never liked being alone. The next day, the search went on, but it wasn't until several days later that investigators received a break. A railway worker conducting his routine rounds near an old train yard found the body of a girl. At first, he thought it was a homeless person, but when he got closer, he realized it was Melissa. Tragically, her body was found near the tracks, and one of her legs had been severed, likely from a passing train. But something didn't quite add up. For one, her purse, containing her ID and a card from a children's organization, was found nearly 20 meters away from the body. If she had been struck by a train, her purse would have likely been much closer to her body. And then, the most puzzling detail: large footprints and traces of blood were found near her purse, leading detectives to suspect foul play. It seemed as though Melissa had been attacked and dragged across the yard to make her death look like an accident. The investigation led detectives to believe the culprit might have been someone familiar with the area, perhaps someone who used the abandoned train cars for shelter or illicit activities. Witnesses came forward, one of whom saw Melissa talking to a man near the tracks, fitting the description of someone who may have been involved in her disappearance. Police focused on finding this man, who drove a rusty old van, but no one could identify him. As the investigation deepened, medical experts confirmed that Melissa didn't die from the train strike. She had been stabbed multiple times, 3 fatal knife wounds. The wounds suggested that the killer was likely left-handed, and this new detail shifted the investigation. The case, now a homicide, drew more attention, but the trail was cold. Months passed, and the case seemed to stall. People began to criticize Janet for allowing her daughter to walk alone near such a dangerous area. Some even blamed social services for not intervening sooner, but the accusations did little to move the investigation forward. Then, 12 years after Melissa's death, a new suspect emerged. Tommy Lynn Sells, a man whose criminal history seemed to match the details of Melissa's case, was briefly investigated. But ultimately, detectives ruled him out after determining he wasn't in the area at the time of Melissa's disappearance. In 2013, a breakthrough came, but it was accidental. While interrogating a man for an unrelated case, investigators learned he had witnessed Melissa the day she disappeared. The man said he saw her sitting on the steps outside the bar with a man named Mike, someone known to have a shady reputation. After some time, another man approached them, and the 3 of them walked off together. But there was a major contradiction in the witness's story. He claimed to have seen Melissa sitting on the steps when it was already dark outside. The problem? Melissa was last seen in broad daylight, and her disappearance had been reported much earlier in the afternoon, before nightfall. As investigators dug into this new lead, they were struck by the inconsistencies. The witness had been just a teenager when he saw Melissa, and now, years later, he was bringing this information to light, claiming he had kept it to himself all these years. He said he had been warned by his relatives to stay away from Mike, the man seen with Melissa, but when he learned of Melissa's tragic death, he felt compelled to speak up. Still, this lead didn't quite fit into the timeline of events. Melissa was last seen alive around 4 p.m., and it wasn't until 9 p.m. that Janet realized she was missing. The discrepancy in the witness's recollection left investigators wondering if this new information was truly relevant, or if it was an attempt to gain attention after the case had been reopened. As the years went by, investigators continued to sift through old evidence, re-examine previous leads, and re-interview witnesses. In 2017, there was another promising lead. A man named John Doe was brought in for questioning after he was allegedly involved in a traffic incident in the same area where Melissa was last seen. However, he had an alibi and was eventually ruled out as a suspect. Then, in 2020, the case took another unexpected turn. A witness, whose identity remained confidential, came forward with new information. This person claimed to have seen a brown, rusted van with a large bearded man parked near the train yard where Melissa's body was found. The description matched the one given by previous witnesses who had seen Melissa interacting with a man near the bar. Police began re-examining the van sightings, but with little concrete evidence to tie any of the suspects directly to the murder, the case remained a frustrating mystery. The lack of new physical evidence and the passing of so many years made it seem like the killer might never be caught. So, after more than 3 decades, the questions surrounding Melissa's death remain unanswered. Was she the victim of a brutal random attack, or was there something more sinister at play? Who was the man with the van, and why did Melissa disappear without a trace? Could someone close to her have known more than they let on? The case of Melissa Tremblay serves as a chilling reminder that some mysteries linger long after the search for answers seems to have stalled. As investigators continue to review old evidence, perhaps one day they'll finally uncover the truth about what happened to that bright, energetic young girl who went for a walk and never came back. That's the tragic and puzzling case of Melissa Tremblay. Her disappearance and death have left many questions unanswered. The search for the truth continues even after decades. If you have any information, please contact your local authorities.